Good morning to our webinar on DORA. Today we are looking a bit more closely on the implementation process from a financial entities perspective, but also from an IT service provider's perspective. My name is Verena Ritter-Döring. I'm heading the financial regulatory group here at Taylor Wessing in Germany, and I have been involved with DORA from the start, but also very closely for the last months. And as always, I'm here with Miroslav Duric, my colleague, who is an expert on fintech and crypto, but he also does all our IT regulatory stuff at Taylor Wessing, and he has been implementing DORA requirements for clients mainly for the last months, I would say since last November. This is our daily business. DORA is not only more present on our table, it's also more present on BaFin's agenda currently. And it's not even 8 months anymore until DORA will enter into force in January next year. So this is a very short time frame, so I think it's a good time to talk a bit more about the implementation process. As always, our webinar will be recorded for you. There is also, as always, a question button on your right side where you can ask questions during the webinar. We will try to answer your questions at the end. Only Miroslav and I will see the questions, so it's anonymous, so please feel free to ask away. This is a webinar for you, and you should make the most out of it. If you want to have our slide decks, please let us know, and on request we will also send this over to you. So let's get started. So I will be very brief on the first part. We all know what DORA is about, so I can be brief. In part 2, we will get into a bit more detail of what is to do next. Part 3 will be about outsourcing, which is crucial also for IT service providers, and we get a lot of questions on this currently. And in the end, we will, as always, share with you some practical considerations. So let's start. So DORA will start to apply mid of January next year. And because this question comes very often, I want to remind us all what DORA is about, because the determination and the quality of supervision will really depend, and also the interpretation of DORA and the legal terms in DORA will really depend on this. So DORA is intended to better protect the financial sector in the EU against cyber threats. So the sector depends very heavily on digital processes, on digitalization, on a sound IT infrastructure, and of the safety of the customer data. Any failure of internal systems of a financial entity, of a large one, but could also be a small one, and of any cyber attacks in the financial market will probably reach far beyond the entity that is directly affected by it. So this has a huge impact on the financial market, and will also have an impact on the European economy as such. And also, if you are a critical IT service provider, it is also crucial for the financial market that your IT infrastructure is secure, resilient, and sound, because of the concentration risk you bear as a critical service provider. Well, it is crucial for the financial market, and this is where the legislator comes from in the EU. It has to work, and we have to keep this in mind when we interpret terms in DORA because this is where the supervisor will come from. And a lot of questions can be asked if we remind ourselves of this. So, well, the main addressees of DORA are, of course, the financial entities, credit institutions, insurance companies, payment institutions, and so on. But also, and we see this in our daily work, but also the IT service providers are heavily affected, and they are not used to regulation as such, whereas the financial entities, the regulated entities, yeah, we are completely used to it because we get new regulation twice a year. So this is new. And I will also make this brief. When we look at the current IT framework in the EU, in Germany, we will have in mind the requirements for the IT, for banks, for insurance companies, for payment services, for asset managers in the BAIT framework, and so on. We have EMA risk when it comes to risk management, also of risk management of IT risks. We have EMA risk on outsourcing, and we have, of course, the ESA guidelines on outsourcing as well. So we have a lot of things already there, but so we are not starting from scratch. That's the good news, but we still have to start and have to act to be compliant to DORA, and BaFin also emphasized that compliance with the current IT framework does not mean you are compliant with DORA, but it is a good start. So, yes, and this is, I can also make this sure. I mean, DORA will be, we all know the EU regulations, so it will directly apply in all European member states to get a harmonized, regulated IT infrastructure for the financial market. The RTS will also become regulations and will also apply directly. And all the other sector-specific acts we have are also still IT requirements, and they apply next to DORA. They just apply the same way they have, of course. So, and here, as I said, it's 17th of January 25. DORA will go live. So, and now I hand over to Miroslav to give you a bit more insight.
Hello and welcome from my side as well. So now we're gonna dig a bit deeper into the DORA framework, starting with a brief overview of the 5 key pillars of the new regulation. So first and foremost, financial entities that Verena briefly mentioned that are in scope of DORA will need to establish, set up a comprehensive internal governance and control framework for the digital operational resilience that needs to be comprised of processes, procedures, systems, tools, as well as internal functions, as well as proper task allocation within the organization that shall provide for proper management of ICT-related risks, challenges, and ensuring digital operational resiliency. As part of this ICT governance framework, institutions will need to establish well-documented ICT risk management framework that is basically aiming to ensure that institutions can early on identify the ICT risks that their business may be exposed to, as well as manage them accordingly in accordance with the new regulatory requirements. The risk management framework likewise needs to be comprised of strategies, documented policies, as well as internal processes, procedures, systems, and tools that ensure effective identification and management of ICT risks that are of relevance for the entity. As part of this broader framework, institutions will also need to develop and establish internal framework and processes and procedures for the incident management. So all ICT related incidents that may occur during their daily business need to be properly identified, classified, and reported to the national competent authorities in accordance with the new requirements. We're gonna come to each of these points during our today's session. The fourth pillar is the everything getting around security, information security, disaster recovery, and business continuity management. Institutions will largely need to align their existing internal IT frameworks on information security, as well as, provided that they have them already, business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Why we are mentioning this is because the new requirements on BCM and disaster recovery go way beyond the existing requirements, even those stipulated by national law of some EU member states that are quite advanced in this area, like, for instance, Germany. And last, but most certainly not least, is the third-party service provider risk management. This is a very important pillar of the new framework. The financial entities will need to basically manage ICT risks related to their third-party service providers. As we all know, nowadays the entire financial services industry has become largely dependent on the proper functioning of external service providers, specialized service providers, like software as a service providers, cloud providers, and so on and so on. And by acknowledging and recognizing risks that may be associated with this practice, the EU lawmakers have created new requirements on vendor due diligence, contractual terms, as well as the ongoing management of existing ICT arrangements with external vendors in accordance with the new requirements. Now, if we take a look now at the ICT risk management framework, this can be pretty much summarized as follows. So the ICT risk management framework needs to be based on procedures, tools, and systems of the financial entity that need to be used first for the protection of ICT assets. ICT assets are basically all ICT assets of the financial entity, like computer software, hardware, servers, as well as physical components thereof. So, for instance, business premises where these are located, data centers, and so on and so on. The second are the procedures and internal tools and systems for the effective identification and management of ICT related risks that are related to companies' business. Secondly, as part of this entire ICT risk management framework pretty much needs to be based on a proper internal governance. So management under DORA, management board, bears ultimate responsibility for the compliance with the new requirements. However, the new regulation also requires financial entities to create a new internal function that is responsible for monitoring and management of ICT risks. This new function sits somewhere in between the existing IT security officers that we know, for instance, from the German laws and regulations, and the risk management officer. Therefore, it is at this stage, at least not until we get some guidance from the regulators, unclear whether this function can be brought within the scope of tasks of some existing function, like, for instance, the IT security officer. And the ICT risk management framework needs to be properly documented. So it needs to be based on a comprehensive ICT risk management policy that needs to be reviewed once a year, or event-driven as well, the policy as well as the entire framework, and needs to be also audited on a regular basis. When it comes to this, the financial entities are expected to take a risk-based approach and apply accordingly a proportionality principle. This entire framework basically needs to be based on one key document under DORA, which is the Digital Operational Resilience Strategy. Financial entities under DORA need to prepare this strategy that basically needs to set out how the ICT risk management framework is implemented within an organization by explaining and outlining how the ICT risk management framework described in the ICT risk management policy is in line with the entity's business strategy and overall objectives. It also needs to list and explain different mechanisms that the entity has put in place for the purposes of protection, detection, and prevention of impacts that the ICT-related incidents may have on their day-to-day business, and also needs to define clear information security objectives. This document needs to be approved by the board. Needs also to be a bit more technical, so it needs to include some key performance indicators and key risk metrics that also need to be taken into consideration when it comes to the third-party risk management that we're going to come to a bit later. Also, a communication strategy for the disclosure of ICT incidents, not only to the regulators, but also to the counterparties and the clients, is also an essential part of this. And last but not least, the digital operational resilience testing is one very important topic under DORA that needs to be likewise properly addressed in the digital operational resilience strategy. Speaking about the ICT risk management framework, basically here we can see what are some aims of this part of DORA and what are some key to-dos for the financial entities. So entities need to identify, classify, and adequately document all ICT supported business functions, roles, and responsibilities within their organizations, as well as the aforementioned ICT assets. They also need to identify all sources of ICT risks, both internally as well as externally, that they may be exposed by their own or through third-party service providers in their day-to-day business, as well as to identify and assess all cyber threats and ICT vulnerabilities that their systems may potentially be exposed to. They are likewise required to set up internal processes, tools, and procedures that shall enable them to protect themselves from and prevent the ICT-related incidents and cyber threats in accordance with the new requirements, as well as to have systems in place that provide for continuous monitoring and control of security and functioning of their ICT systems and tools. What this means, practically speaking. So what are some key to-dos for the financial entities? First, they need to develop, as I mentioned before, ICT risk management policy. Alongside this policy, they also need to create, if they don't have already, we know that at least in Germany, the vast majority of financial entities already have. In this case, would need to upgrade their information security policy that needs to define rules on the protection of data, information assets, and ICT assets. They also need to establish sound network and infrastructure management structure by using appropriate techniques and methods and protocols for the isolation, prevention, and management of ICT-related incidents and cyber attacks. They also need, as part of this, particular processes and procedures need to be put in place that basically protect the physical parts of the IT infrastructure of the financial entity by putting in place, for instance, access control systems, strong customer authentication processes, and so on and so on. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, so the entire framework needs to be properly documented, and last but not least, also needs to include specific requirements, internal requirements, and procedure on the change management. So when the entity is changing key pieces of their software and hardware infrastructure, how this is to be managed accordingly in order not to expose the financial entity to excessive risk of any kind. As mentioned before, the financial entities basically need to develop a comprehensive framework that needs also to include clear tasks and requirements on the ICT management. They need to identify all ICT risks, cyber threats, and ICT vulnerabilities that are of relevance for their business. For this purpose, they need to implement processes and procedures that basically are able to detect anomalous activities, for instance, ICT network performance issues or incidents that may have a negative impact on their business. And this everything is being done with the primary aim that the institutions can properly respond to any shortcomings they can experience in performance or cyber attacks, ICT incidents of other sorts, and so on, that basically need to then be classified and reported in the case of ICT related incidents to their national competent authorities, or in the case of the cyber threats, we're going to see now what that means. There is a voluntary notification recommendation, so to say, for the financial entities in this case. So speaking a lot about the ICT related incidents, what are these actually? So an ICT incident is a single event or series of linked events that are first and foremost unplanned by the financial entities and that basically compromise the security of the network and information systems that the financial entity is relying on for the purposes of provision of their services. So either in the front office or the back office functions that support the proper functioning of the entity. These incidents can also have the impact on the availability, authenticity, integrity, and confidentiality of data that financial entity is processing for the purposes of the provision of its services or functioning of its support functions. In accordance with the new requirements, entities will be required to report the so-called major ICT-related incidents to their national competent authorities. These are basically the incidents that have a high adverse impact on the network and information systems that support critical or important functions of the financial entity. We're going to come to some of these terms a bit later, but just beforehand, so speaking about the critical or important functions, many of you that are already subject or have experience with the EBA framework on outsourcing arrangements, the EU lawmaker has really followed the similar logic under DORA. So critical or important functions are basically the functions of the financial entity that are either essential for the provision of the service, of the regulated service to the customers, or for the proper functioning of the back office functions that are essential for the proper day-to-day conduction of the day-to-day business of the entity. The second category that I briefly mentioned are also cyber threats. So financial entities need to identify them early on and manage them accordingly. Cyber threats are basically defined quite broadly, so as any potential circumstance, event, or action that could damage, disrupt, or otherwise impact network and information systems of the financial entity. And it is recommended to financial entities under DORA that significant cyber threats, so that the technical characteristics of which indicate that they could have the potential to result in major ICT-related incidents down the road, need to be voluntarily notified, so notified on a voluntary basis to the national competent authorities of the financial entities. So here we can see what are some key obligations for the financial entities when it comes to ICT incident management. So first and foremost, financial entities need to detect anomalous activities, ICT performance issues, shortcomings in performance, and ICT-related incidents by using detection mechanisms that they have put in place as part of their broader ICT risk management framework that needs to basically that need to be based on alert thresholds and criteria that are triggered when certain events occur. So this is usually based on some early warning indicators, alert mechanisms that are basically being used to alert the responsible staff upon the detection of any issue in the performance of the network and information systems of the entity. Once the ICT incident or a potential ICT incident or cyber threat is detected, in the second stage, entities need to classify these incidents and cyber threats in accordance with the regulatory requirements. We're going to come to that in a second. And need to identify among these the ICT incidents and significant cyber threats that need to be reported to their NCAs. In the third step, they need to report major ICT-related incidents to the NCAs, as well as cyber threats, significant cyber threats on a voluntary basis. We're going to also come to that a bit later. And last but not least, it is important to understand that financial entities are not only required to report these to their supervisory authorities, but also need to establish communication channels in place for the communication of these ICT-related incidents with their counterparties and their clients. So for this purpose, they need to prepare a designated communication policy that needs to be followed in this case, and also designate a person that is responsible for the management of this kind of communications in the case of occurrence of an ICT incident. So as I mentioned, in the second step, financial entities need to classify ICT incidents by following some key obligations. This needs to be done based on a couple of criteria that are defined in the primary as well as in secondary legislation, DORA, some of which are can be seen on the left-hand side of the slide. So the main criteria is basically how critical was the service for of the entity that was affected by the ICT-related incidents. Also, the second, which clients have been affected, which financial counterparties, how many transactions, speaking in the volume of transactions and the importance for the day-to-day business of the financial entity and its counterparties. What was the duration of the incident? What was the service downtime? What was the geographical spread? Also, what are some technical data on some information about the impact on the data losses happened as a result of the incident, as well as reputational and economic impact that the incident is going to have for the financial entity. As mentioned before, so only major ICT incidents need to be reported to the NCS in accordance with requirements on the reporting procedure. We'll get into that in a second. And it is very, very important just to clarify here, because we heard in a number of meetings and talks some confusion in the industry. So DORA, in no mean whatsoever, replaces the existing reporting obligations that the entities may be subject to under other key pieces of EU regulations. So, for instance, data breaches under GDPR and so on and so on. So basically, this needs to be seen as a separate silos of reporting channels that need to be used for the purpose of compliance with these new requirements. In the level 2, so the European supervisory authorities have developed regulatory technical standards that specify the criteria for the classification of ICT-related incidents. For those of you who are already familiar with them, the latest final report was published on 17th of January 2024 and has included some changes to the thresholds and provided some further clarifications for the industry. So first, the threshold regarding the affected clients was actually increased from the originally specified 50,000 clients to 100,000 clients. Second threshold regarding the number of affected financial counterparties has also been increased from 10% to 30%. And there are also some further clarifications. For instance, when it comes to recurring ICT-related incidents, the aggregation time frame has been extended to 6 months from previously 3 months. And when it comes to critical services affected, the criterion for the management escalated impacts that was in the original draft was actually removed. And in the last step, financial entities need to report these incidents to their regulators by following this procedure. This procedure has been clarified in the ESA's RTS, as well as implementing technical standards, ITS, that provide some standard forms, templates, and procedures that need to be used for reporting. But it can be summarized as follows. So the initial report needs to be sent to the regulators as early as possible, within 4 hours from the moment of classification of the ICT incident as major, but by no means later than 24 hours from the time of the detection of the incident. This is a very important time frame because if we speak, for instance, about the financial entities that rely on other financial entities or external ICT service providers, they also need to take this into consideration when negotiating contractual terms with them. The second is the intermediate report that needs to be sent to the regulator within 72 hours from the classification of the incident as major, or alternatively, this also needs to be done when regular activities have been recovered and business is basically, so to say, business as usual, back to normal. And last but not least, financial entities need to send the final report to the regulators no later than within 1 month from the classification of the incident as major. And where the incident has been completely resolved, the final report should be submitted the day after the incident has been resolved permanently to the regulator. The RTS and ITS, they provide some further clarity on this. Conscious of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. Just briefly, they specify minimum content requirements for all of these three reports. They also specify the content for the notification of significant cyber threats. As mentioned before, also some templates, standard forms, as well as the above mentioned reporting timelines. The next topic, very important topic under DORA framework, is everything in and around response and recovery from the ICT incidents and disruptions. So as part of their overall risk management framework, financial entities need to put in place comprehensive ICT business continuity policy and business continuity plans. This policy needs to set the basis for internal arrangements, plans, procedures, and mechanisms that are used to ensure the continuity of the financial entity's regular business in the case of any disruptions, as well as the ways in which financial entity can effectively respond to and resolve ICT-related incidents within a short period of time so that it does not impact their regular business activities, their customers and counterparties aggressively. What are some key to-dos in this area? So first, financial entities need to prepare the business continuity policy. Many financial entities that we work with already have some. So basically in this area, the upgrade is required in accordance with the new requirements. The second is, which is a bit new, financial entities need to conduct business impact analysis of their exposure to severe business, so ICT-related business disruptions. Under this impact analysis, they need to assess the potential impact of severe disruptions by using quantitative and qualitative criteria that can give them a technical and basically a practical taste of the scenarios that they may be exposed to. The second document that needs to be prepared as part of this package is the ICT disaster recovery plan. Basically, this document needs to outline the processes and procedure that the entity is relying on to recover from the ICT-related incident that has occurred. So to basically restore and recover procedures and data and systems used for the provision of the regulated service or the critical support functions. Also in this part, DORA requires financial entities to designate a crisis management person, which in the event of activation of business continuity plans and recovery plans shall set out clear procedures how to manage internally and external crisis communications. This is the function that we mentioned, if you remember a couple of slides before, and that basically is a center point for the communication with the counterparties, clients, and interested authorities. As part of this, also backup systems need to be set in place that basically can ensure proper backup and storage of data in alternative places. So for instance, if the primary place where the data is stored is impacted, financial entities need to have an alternative physical place where the data is going to be stored and where data can be recovered from in the case of disruption that the primary place of data storage and processing experiences ICT-related incidents. And last but not least, we're going to come to this topic in a second. They also need to test their business continuity and disaster recovery plans at least annually, as well as where necessary on an event-driven basis. So speaking about the testing requirements, under DORA, financial entities need to set up digital operational resilience testing programs. So this is basically a testing program that shall enable financial entities to assess early on their preparedness for ICT-related incidents and to identify early on and efficiently weaknesses, deficiencies, or gaps in their digital operational resilience, so vulnerabilities that they may be having. This testing program shall establish a basis for the execution of various types of tests, like, for instance, vulnerability assessments, open source analysis, network security assessments, gap analysis, as well as physical security reviews of physical premises that are of importance for the proper functioning of network and information systems of the financial entities. This testing needs to be performed on an annual basis by independent parties. Contrary to the original draft, where the external audit was mandated by the lawmaker, the last version of DORA basically specifies that this can be done either internally or externally, as long as the person conducting the test is independent enough. Therefore, we can imagine that some of the key control functions within the organization may be assigned with the performance of these tests. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that there is a special set of requirements that apply to a smaller group of financial institutions under DORA, which is advanced testing, the so-called threat-led penetration testing, TLPT, commonly known as TLPT. The TLPT is basically a testing method that mimics a real-time dangers and ICT incidents and cyber attacks that entities may be exposed to. It needs to be, due to its complexity, it needs to be performed by certified professional testing providers that will be accredited by an accreditation body at the member state level. It needs to be done every 3 years and shall cover at least critical or important functions. Financial entities that operate on a cross-border basis are required to comply with a single set of advanced testing requirements, and also pooled testing, so performed by testing provider for more financial institutions jointly, is also allowed. This is very helpful. Nonetheless, it still needs to be mentioned that the entire topic around TLPT is quite complicated, especially in external ICT service provider environment, where this kind of testing would need to be performed due to the risks that are related to this type of testing. European supervisory authorities have specified in the regulatory technical standards some key additional technical requirements that need to be complied with when it comes to TLPT. However, we're not going to go into this now. Conscious of time, I'm going to move to the next chapter. So the next chapter, as we mentioned initially, very important, is related to the management of ICT third-party risks. So, conscious of the increasing reliance of financial entities on external ICT service providers, the lawmaker has created a new management framework that financial entities need to comply with. And basically, when it comes to arrangements, so we commonly know them as outsourcing arrangements under DORA, financial entities will need to basically treat all of their ICT service arrangements in accordance with these requirements. So first, before they enter into a contract with an ICT service provider, they will need to identify and assess all ICT risks that may be associated to this particular service arrangement. So these can be risks related to the business reputation, track record of the provider, location where the provider is located or where data is going to be processed and stored, as well as the location of the parent undertaking. And what also needs to be analyzed as part of this initial due diligence is also the ability of the service provider to provide service in accordance with the contractual terms, also to comply with information security standards as specified in the agreement. One very important point that needs to be assessed at this stage is also the assessment of the so-called concentration risk. Concentration risk is basically the risk that financial entities may be exposed to as a result of over-reliance on one particular service provider. So this can happen due to the fact that particular service provider is not easily replaceable. So for instance, if we talk about some major IT providers providing cloud services or similar technology, and also it can be problematic in the case where a financial entity is relying on an ICT service provider at multiple levels, so at the parent undertaking as well as multiple subsidiaries level in the EU. In the second phase, the contractual phase, once the financial entity has assessed that the ICT service arrangement can be concluded, All ICT arrangements, same as under EBA guidelines, need to be based on an agreement in writing. The general requirements for all, as well as some additional requirements for arrangements supporting critical or important functions, are replicating in many ways the requirements under EBA guidelines. However, there are some novelties that need to be also taken into due consideration. Also, the changes to the agreement as well as subcontracting subject need to be subject to specific conditions. What is also important to mention, in the post-contractual phase, financial entities need to monitor the performance of the ICT service providers. So regular performance reporting is becoming a new normal for critical important function related arrangements. And what is also new here is that financial entities will need to ensure that their ICT service providers also monitor the performance of their subcontractors. This is very cumbersome, very complicated part of DORA that we also need to get a bit more clarity on. Despite the fact that, for instance, here financial entities are the primary addressees of these rules, they will highly likely shift, at least to a certain extent, burden to contractually to their ICT service providers that will be required to assist them in the process. Speaking about that, and conscious of time, I'm just going to summarize this. So if you want to get into details on any of these points, just feel free to contact us. As part of this ICT third-party risk management, entities will need to set up a new internal function that will be responsible to supervise all third-party arrangements. This is something similar like an outsourcing officer that we know from the existing framework. However, it is still unclear. It is still to be clarified in the coming period by the national competent authorities whether this function can be blended into, combined with the outsourcing officer or not. Entities also need to develop the strategy on the ICT third-party risks. This strategy needs to set basically clear allocation of roles and responsibilities within the entity, as well as clear criteria for determination of which ICT service arrangements fall under critical or important regime. It is important to mention here that the steering wheel is basically in the hands of the financial entity. So any negotiation with the financial entities needs to be done under due consideration of the fact that no regulators are going to be jumping in and telling financial entities from the beginning which service arrangements are deemed as critical or important and which not. And when it comes to subcontracting, I'm just gonna explain this in a bit more detail because this is a very, very important part of DORA. The regulatory technical standards specify the elements which financial entities need to determine and assess when subcontracting ICT services to ICT service providers with the subcontracting chain. This basically puts an obligation, a legal obligation on the financial entities and then contractual obligation on the ICT service providers that will need to have in place due diligence processes to assess whether and to what extent their subcontractors can meet the requirements that they need to fulfill under the master service agreement, for instance. ICT service providers also need to have processes in place to overview and monitor the performance of the entire subcontracting chain. It is very unclear how far down the subcontracting chain this needs to be done. Also, there is not that many specifications for the ICT service providers, how they need to ensure their compliance with these rules in the coming period. Therefore, this is going to be one area where we really hope we're going to get some further clarifications from the NCAs, hopefully before the go-live date. And when it comes to contractual requirements, as we mentioned, there is quite a lot of requirements that are basically replicated from the EBA guidelines. Some highlights. The entire agreement need to be in one place, in one document. It is unclear how this needs to be implemented in practice. So for instance, we know that many service providers have master service agreements and a number of addendums that are hyperlinked into the agreement. From a technical standpoint, how this needs to be done is still subject to interpretation and to debate. As we mentioned also earlier, the monitoring of performance of the service providers is also necessary, as well as provisions on TLPT that provide for basis for TLPT, also especially conscious of the pooled testing option and multi-tenant environment and the risks that ICT service provider can be exposed to as a result of that. And here we have 2 slides on the critical ICT third-party providers. I'm just gonna, given that we're running out of time, I'm just gonna summarize these very briefly. So a small group of ICT service providers, large critical third-party service providers, will be designated as such, and they're going to be, so these are, for instance, big tech companies that provide services to a number of financial entities across the EU. These will be subject to some specific requirements, and also will become subject to a new oversight framework. So for the first time in history, European financial supervisory authorities will become competent to directly supervise these ICT service providers, and EBA, ESMA, or EIOPA will be assigned, depending on from which sector the financial services industry the majority of the company's clients come from, will be assigned as the so-called lead overseer. This lead overseer will also have direct supervisory powers vis-a-vis the financial entity. So the national competent authorities are going to be responsible for the supervision of the financial entity, whereas the lead overseer will directly supervise the critical third-party provider. They will have a wide number of direct oversight powers, so they will be able to carry out on-site inspections, detailed assessments, issue recommendations, as well as to impose penalties in the case of non-compliance, which are quite high, up to 1% of the average daily worldwide turnover of the CTPP in the precedent business year. Also, alongside this direct enforcement option, there is indirect enforcement option by the NCAs. So in the case that they don't follow the recommendations of the lead overseer, NCAs will have the power to basically request from financial entities to terminate or suspend their service arrangements with that particular third-party provider. Just very briefly here, as mentioned before, we have a number of Level 2 and Level 3 acts that are still to be finalized. The first batch was finalized on 17th of January 2024, and the second, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, is to be finalized by the 17th of July 2024. These will hopefully provide us with some good and helpful clarification that will assist the financial entities and third-party providers in the implementation process. However, as mentioned before, there is a number of open questions that still need some further clarification that will not be clarified under Level 3 and Level 3 Act. So we hope that the NCAs are going to jump in effectively and help us find a way before the go live date. So now I'm going to hand over to Verena, who's going to run you through some practical considerations in the implementation process.
Yeah, thank you, Miroslav. I just want to add to this Level 2 and Level 3 acts. So as Miroslav already said, there are also, it's a lot of paper. We still await guidance, further guidance, also to the authorities directly. But there will probably still be gaps in the regulation. Not all your questions will be answered. As a financial entity, you will know this whenever there's new regulation, there are gaps, and we need to try to navigate through this and implement it as reasonable as possible. But for the IT service providers, this is a new piece of regulation and also a new experience that you might even have if you are critical, your own personal lead overseer. There will be gaps, but you can also see this as an opportunity to share. So if there are gaps in interpretation, you can also see this as an opportunity to shape the market standard. this is something I wanted to mention specifically, because we get a lot of complaints, well, we do not know what to do and so on, but it is also an opportunity for you to get your view on this into the market. So, but now let's go in facing the time. Let's talk about the practical considerations a little bit. So as we usually show, we have the identifying phase, the assessment phase, and then the redrafting and preparing phase. I hope we are all at least in the second phase and have done our assessments. We see a lot of drafting on outsourcing agreements from the IT service provider side, but also on the financial entity side. Not everyone is there yet, but I think it's also good. It is burdensome, I know that, but it's necessary, and it should go ideally hand in hand with implementing the IT processes under DORA. We have here listed some key considerations. I only want to emphasize on two. So for both sides, for the financial entity sides and for the IT service provider side, allow time for negotiation. This is a new piece of regulation for all of us, so for the whole market. We see that the financial entities want to be compliant, sometimes even super compliant, and this is challenging for the IT service providers. So you need to have a little bit of time for negotiation for the outsourcing agreements. And as Miroslav already mentioned, one of the main problems or practical problems we are facing, or the whole market is facing, is are the subcontractors. How to handle this? The subcontractors very often are more far away from the regulation, and it is really hard to get them to comply with DORA. So the idea of DORA is, of course, that all the outsourcing requirements the IT service provider has to fulfill will be mirrored by the subcontractors. So, but this is not new. This is actually also the current regulation, and it is hard, and it has not been enforced under the current regulation. So I think there will also be room to develop a market standard for this as well. So stay patient, try to negotiate, stay also reasonable. Some things will work, some things won't work. We see both of you, so the financial entities and the IT service providers, and we also see the problems. And at this stage where guidance is still lacking in crucial points such as the subcontractors, we just need to find a rational and a practical solution to everything. So, and here we have listed, to give you also an overview, this is mainly for the financial entities. We have listed, as Miroslav mentioned in between, the specific topics also, the policies that are required under DORA. I think there are 1 or 2 missing even. So at least 12, 13 policies. Not all is new. As we have also mentioned before, the digital operational resilience strategy, this is a new one, and there is something, there has to go, some thinking has to go into it. You also, as a financial entity, have to write up a policy on the use of ICT service providers. You have to do a business impact assessment and so on. So there are, and the testing, of course, also something new. But the policies you already have under BIT and so on, they need to be upgraded. And BaFin mentioned in one of the interviews recently that Deutsche Bundesbank and BaFin will work together, or Deutsche Bundesbank will then publish a list a gap list between the BIAT requirements and the DORA requirements. It's not there yet, so we get questions on it. It's not there yet. Maybe it's also a bit late, but nevertheless, if we have it, it gives us a bit more legal clarity or more clarity of the administrative practice that BaFin and Bundesbank will exercise. So we'll see when this comes into place. I just wanted to mention this. And as you can easily see, there's a lot of work to do here as well. And the only thing I want to mention here is, well, this all will start to apply in January 2025. So BaFin and the supervisors will probably not be the problem in the first year. I see, from a practical point of view, I see the auditors in charge here. The auditors who do the compliance audit once a year for the financial entities, they will also check compliance with DORA. And as we all know, the auditors are quite difficult at the moment since Wirecard, and they will write their reports and also set out their findings, and those reports will be sent to BaFin. So I think the first year will be mainly about handling the auditors and then implementing whatever is missing, is lacking. So don't be afraid. It will not be everything does not have to be in place in January. It will not. Obviously, it will also not be in place. It's the same with every regulation. But we need to get going, and we need to get our processes in place, the outsourcing agreements in place. Also, the IT service providers need to ensure compliance with DORA as far as they are concerned and as far as they have clients in the financial sector as well. So that was a lot. We have had some questions. Some questions we've already answered. Maybe, I don't think we can answer. We will get back to you by email and answer your questions. Yeah, I think that's the easiest thing to do. Maybe we can take one question, because it's also something that is quite often asked. Miroslav, maybe you want to answer this. There's a question: what is the role of the ISO under DORA or other certifications? Are they still relevant?
Yeah, so certifications that financial entities have been relying on so far are also going to play an important role also moving forward. This also applies to ICT service providers. So ICT service providers will be able to prove their compliance with specific information security standards by providing the entities with the certificates. However, it is important to mention that under the RTS, the European supervisory authorities have basically specified that financial entities can, provided that they are not satisfied with the provided certificate, that the certificate is not up to date or comprehensive enough, can also ask for some alternative assurance levels. This is rather unclear at the moment how this will basically be implemented in practice. However, we strongly believe that the most widely used information security certificates, for instance, like ISO, will still play an important role, and many entities will still be relying on them. So nothing has changed on that one. There is also one question: does the use of a CTPP, which is directly overseen by the lead overseer, take any burden or obligation with regard to control and contractual reporting obligation for such third party from the financial institution? The answer is no. The regime on the CTPPs does not reduce the compliance burden on the financial institution in any way whatsoever. There is nonetheless an indirect impact in terms of that, where a CTPP is supervised by European supervisory authorities, and the CTPP is providing services across the EU27, provided that you as a financial entity rely on the services provided by this entity. There is be a very, very high level of harmonization. So you're not going to be exposed to different, let's say, contractual arrangements or processes or procedures when you cooperate with the CTPP in different countries. So there will be a higher level of harmonization and higher level of efficiency when it comes to CTPPs that will be supervised by the European supervisory authorities, given that they will be implementing any changes that they request them to implement on a group wide basis.
I think we are running out of time.
Yeah.
We will answer your questions in an email, don't worry. Thank you for your participation, for your interest in this really crucial and interesting topic. And I'm sure this will not be the last DORA webinar we are having this year, once we get more guidance throughout this year. So thank you for taking part in this, and have a nice day. See you next time. Bye.